When I asked my wife what time her sister's engagement dinner was, my wife replied, "Oh, we already had it yesterday. Just close family." A week later, she called me in a panic. "The card didn't go through. Did you forget to pay the bill?" I simply said, "Didn't I warn you?" So, here's the thing about being invisible in your own marriage. You don't realize it's happening until someone literally forgets you exist. And boy, did I get a masterclass in that last Tuesday. My name's Marcus Wynn, and I've been married to Priya for 12 years. 12. That's longer than most people keep their cars. Yet apparently not long enough to earn a spot at her sister's engagement dinner. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Picture this. I'm sitting in my home office. You know, the one I pay for with my own damn money, trying to wrap up some quarterly reports that were duller than watching paint dry in slow motion. Priya walks in wearing that flowy dress she bought last month again with my credit card, and she's got that distracted look she gets when she's mentally planning her next shopping spree. "Hey babe," I say, not looking up from my laptop because these numbers weren't going to crunch themselves. "What time is Fiona's engagement dinner again? I need to know when to wrap up here." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife and served it for dessert. I glanced up, and there she was looking at me like I just asked her to explain quantum physics in pig Latin. "Oh," she said. And that little pause right there should have been my first red flag. We already had it yesterday. Just close family. Just close family. Let me paint you a picture of what just close family apparently means in Priya's world. Her parents were there. The same parents who call me every time they need help fixing their Wi-Fi or moving furniture because apparently I'm family enough for manual labor. Her brother Isaac was there too, the guy who borrowed $3,000 from me last Christmas and still hasn't paid it back. But hey, at least he got the salmonry. Fiona's future in-laws were there, people I'd met exactly twice in my life. Hell, even Priya's second cousin from Portland made the cut. And that woman hasn't spoken to our family since the Obama administration. But me, Marcus Wynn, the guy who's been signing the checks that keep this whole circus running. Nah, I didn't make the VIP list. I just nodded. What else was I supposed to do? Throw a tantrum like some toddler who didn't get invited to the cool kid's birthday party? "Okay," I said, keeping my voice as level as a carpenter's ruler. "Sounds like it was nice." And then I did what any self-respecting man would do in that situation. I walked away. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is absolutely nothing at all. That night, while Priya was in the shower, probably washing off the guilt that should have been eating her alive, I found myself on our balcony. This balcony that I picked out when we bought this house with the perfect view of downtown that sold me on the place. The same mortgage payment I've been making solo for the past 12 years while Priya found herself through various hobbies and part-time gigs that never quite covered their own expenses. The city lights were twinkling like they were mocking me, each one representing someone else who was probably having a better evening than I was. I cracked open a beer, a good one, not that cheap stuff, and started doing some math that nobody should have to do about their own marriage. When was the last time Priya included me in something that didn't require my wallet? When was the last time she introduced me as her husband instead of just Marcus? When did I become less of a partner and more of a walking ATM with decent credit and a reliable income? The mortgage payment that came out of my account every month, that was about $1,500. The grocery bills that somehow kept creeping higher despite us eating out more often, another $600 monthly, easy. The car payments for both vehicles because apparently Priya needed something reliable and cute, which translated to expensive and impractical. 800 combined. And let's not forget Fiona's engagement party itself. 3 weeks ago, Priya came to me all excited about this perfect cake she'd found for her sister. Designer baker, organic ingredients, probably blessed by unicorns for all I knew. $400 for what was essentially sugar and flour arranged in a fancy pattern. Did I complain? Nope. I just handed over the card like the good little bank I'd apparently become. But when it came time to actually celebrate, to sit at that table and watch Fiona gush over her ring while everyone toasted with champagne, I probably paid for. Sorry, Marcus. This party is for family only. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was family enough to bankroll their happiness, but not family enough to witness it. I was the ghost in the machine, the invisible hand that made their lifestyle possible. But God forbid I actually wanted to be present for the good parts. You know what really got to me, though? It wasn't just the money. Don't get me wrong, being used as a human credit card stings. But what really twisted the knife was the complete lack of consideration. Priya didn't maliciously exclude me. That almost would have been better, because at least it would have meant she thought about me long enough to actively leave me out. No, this was worse. This was me being so irrelevant to her world that I simply didn't cross her mind when making the guest list for her sister's big moment. Sitting there on that balcony, nursing my beer and my wounded pride, I realized something that probably should have occurred to me years ago. I'd become a supporting character in my own marriage. The reliable guy who made sure the bills got paid and the lights stayed on, but who wasn't interesting enough to actually include in the story. And you know what? That realization didn't make me angry. It made me tired, bone deep, soul-crushing. Tired of being taken for granted by the person who was supposed to love me most. But tired can be dangerous, because tired people start making changes. And buddy, I was about to make some changes that would wake everyone up real quick. You know that feeling when you're finally ready to stand up for yourself, but you're not quite sure how to do it without looking like a complete psycho? Yeah, well, I found a way. And let me tell you, it was more satisfying than winning the lottery while eating pizza. It had been exactly 1 week since the great Just Close family incident, and I'd been doing some serious thinking. The kind of deep, middle-of-the-night thinking that happens when you realize you've been playing yourself for over a decade. I'd made a decision, and like most of my best decisions, it was beautifully simple and potentially devastating. I was sitting in my office downtown wrestling with spreadsheets that made about as much sense as Priya's spending habits when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp. The caller ID showed Priya's contact photo, the one where she's laughing at something I probably said back when she still found me amusing instead of just financially useful. Marcus. She practically screamed into the phone, and I had to hold the device away from my ear before she'd burst my eardrum. The card didn't go through. Did you forget to pay the bill? Oh, the sweet, sweet sound of panic in her voice. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a little smile that would have made the Grinch proud. 3 days ago, while she was at her yoga class, you know, the one that costs $80 a session because apparently regular yoga isn't enlightening enough, I'd made some executive decisions about our financial arrangements. I let the silence stretch out like taffy, counting to 10 in my head, while she probably sweated bullets on the other end. "Didn't I warn you?" I finally said, keeping my voice as casual as if she'd asked me about the weather. "Warn me about what, Marcus? I'm standing here in Target with a cart full of stuff and your car just got declined in front of everyone. Do you know how embarrassing this is?" Target? Of course it was Target. The black hole where money goes to die, where people go in for toothpaste and come out with a cart full of throw pillows, scented candles, and organic quinoa they'll never eat. I could practically see her standing there with her cart, loaded up with God knows what unnecessary crap. Probably wearing those athleisure outfits that cost more than most people's rent. "See, here's the thing, babe," I said, and I could hear the confusion in the background noise as she tried to process what was happening. 3 days ago, I removed you as an authorized user on my main account. You know, the one you've been treating like your personal shopping fund. Yeah, that card you're holding is about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Now, the silence on her end was golden. Pure, unadulterated golden silence. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to figure out if I was serious or just having some kind of midlife crisis breakdown. "You what?" she finally managed to stammer out. "I replaced the whole card, actually. New number, new everything. Funny thing about being the primary account holder. Turns out I can make executive decisions about who gets to spend my money. Wild concept, right? I'd spent those 3 days documenting exactly where my hard-earned cash had been disappearing to. And let me tell you, it was more educational than a college course. Spa days that cost more than my car payment. Check. Brunches with her girlfriends where they probably spent 2 hours complaining about their husbands while running up a tab that could feed a small village. Double check. Shopping sprees that resulted in closets full of clothes with tags still on them. Triple check with a cherry on top. But my personal favorite was the emergency dress shopping expedition she'd taken Fiona on last month. Apparently, Fiona desperately needed 3 new outfits for various pre-wedding events because, heaven forbid, she wears something twice like us regular people. $800 later, my account was lighter and Fiona's closet was fuller. But somehow I was still persona non grata at family gatherings. "Marcus, this isn't funny," Priya was saying, and I could hear the edge creeping into her voice. "People are staring at me." "Oh, now you're worried about people staring," I said, chuckling like I just heard the world's best dad joke. That's rich, coming from someone who had no problem making me disappear at her sister's engagement dinner. But hey, at least when people stared at me that night, it was because I wasn't there. That's different, is it though? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you're perfectly fine with me being invisible. Until you need something, like money. Then, suddenly, I'm very visible and very necessary. I could hear her trying to compose herself, probably looking around to see who was witnessing her financial reality check. The thing about being married to someone for 12 years is that you know exactly how they think. And right now, Priya was calculating. She was wondering if this was just a temporary tantrum or if I'd actually grown a spine. "So, what am I supposed to do now?" she asked. And there it was. The question that revealed everything. Not, "I'm sorry for excluding you." Not, "I realize I've been taking you for granted." But, what am I supposed to do now? Because, of course, her biggest concern was how this inconvenience affected her immediate plans. "Well, you could try using your own money," I suggested helpfully. "You know that revolutionary concept where people pay for their own stuff with money they actually earn themselves? Marcus, you know I don't have what? A job that pays enough to support your lifestyle. Credit cards of your own. Savings from all those years of not paying bills." I was really enjoying this conversation now because those sound like personal problems, not husband problems. The beautiful thing about finally standing up for yourself is that you realize how much power you actually had all along. For 12 years, I've been playing the role of the accommodating husband, the provider who didn't ask questions and didn't make waves. But providers, it turns out, have one hell of a trump card. They can stop providing. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she said. and I could hear tears starting to creep into her voice. I'm not doing anything to you, Priya. I'm finally doing something for me. There's a difference, though I realize you might not be familiar with the concept. And with that beautiful mic drop moment, I hung up the phone, leaned back in my chair, and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Completely, utterly, perfectly in control of my own damn life. The best part? This was just the beginning. If you've never had the pleasure of walking into your own house and feeling like you're about to face a firing squad, let me paint you a picture. It's like that dream where you show up to school naked, except you're fully clothed, and the person trying to embarrass you is supposed to love you unconditionally. I pulled into our driveway that evening, and I could already see Priya through the front window, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger who'd just been told the zookeeper was running late with dinner. Her arms were crossed in that universal, "you're in deep" position that wives have perfected since the dawn of marriage. And honestly, I was almost looking forward to this conversation. The front door opened before I could even get my key out, which told me she'd been watching for my car like a hawk circling roadkill. There she stood, still in those expensive yoga clothes from her Target adventure, looking like she was ready to prosecute me for crimes against her shopping habits. "We need to talk," she said, which is wife speak for prepare to be lectured about how you're wrong and I'm the victim. "Hey there, sunshine," I said, dropping my briefcase by the door and loosening my tie. "How was your day?" "Mine was great. Thanks for asking. Really productive meeting with the quarterly budget reports." She followed me into the living room like a storm cloud with legs. "Don't be cute, Marcus. Why are you acting like this? You embarrassed me in front of Fiona and her friends." And there it was, the magic word that made my eye twitch. Embarrassed. I turned around slowly like I was in some kind of Western showdown. Except instead of guns, we were armed with 12 years of built-up resentment and a serious communication problem. "I embarrassed you?" I asked, genuinely curious about the mental gymnastics that had led her to that conclusion. Help me understand this logic, because I'm apparently too stupid to follow along. How exactly did I embarrass you when I wasn't even there? You know what I mean? No, actually I don't. See, last I checked, embarrassment usually requires the embarrassing person to be present for the embarrassing event. But since I was sitting at home eating leftover pizza while you were at your sister's engagement dinner with just close family, I'm not sure how I managed to embarrass you from 20 meters away. Did I develop telepathic powers I don't know about? She rolled her eyes so hard, I was surprised they didn't fall out and roll across the floor. You declined my card in public, Marcus. In front of people. Oh, so now we're getting to the real issue. It wasn't that I wasn't invited to celebrate your sister's engagement, something I would have actually enjoyed. By the way, it wasn't that I found out about a family event through the absence of an invitation. No. The real tragedy here is that your credit card got declined at Target. It's not just about the card, isn't it, though? I sat down in my favorite chair, the one I'd bought with my own money after she declared our old couch too masculine for her aesthetic vision. Because from where I'm sitting, this whole conversation started with you being upset about a card not working, not about whether I felt excluded or unappreciated. She started pacing again, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to spin this situation to make herself the injured party. It was like watching a politician prepare for a debate. Lots of movement, lots of energy, but not a lot of substance. "You could have told me," she finally said, and I had to give her credit for finding the weakest possible argument to stand on. Could have told you what? That I was tired of being treated like a walking ATM? That I felt like the only time you noticed I existed was when you needed money for something. But I've been telling you for months that I felt taken for granted, but you only heard the parts about dinner reservations and weekend plans. The look on her face was priceless, like she'd just been told that water was wet and was trying to argue that it was actually dry. I listened to you. Do you? Because 3 weeks ago when you asked me to pay for Fiona's cake, I said I felt like I was being used. Remember what you said? It's just money, Marcus. Family helps family. But apparently family doesn't include family at family dinners. She had the decency to look uncomfortable at that, which was progress. That's different. How? Explain to me how that's different, because I'm genuinely curious about the mental pretzel you've twisted yourself into here. It just is. That's not an answer, Priya. That's what kids say when they can't explain why they broke something. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at our neighborhood where other couples were probably having normal Tuesday evening conversations about work and weather and what to watch on Netflix. Meanwhile, I was having to explain to my wife of 12 years why I deserved basic respect in my own marriage. Let me ask you something, I said, turning back to face her. What am I to you, Priya? Really? Not what you think you're supposed to say. Not what sounds good in marriage counseling. What am I to you? She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. And in that moment of silence, I got my answer louder than if she'd screamed it from the rooftops. A husband. Or a credit plan. I pressed because sometimes you have to make people confront the truth they don't want to see. That's not fair. Life's not fair, sweetheart. But marriage is supposed to be a partnership, not a subscription service. And right now, I feel less like your husband and more like your premium membership to the Bank of Marcus. She deflected because of course she did. You could have told me you were going to change the cards. I did tell you for months. I told you I felt invisible. I told you I felt used. I told you I wanted to feel like a partner instead of a paycheck. But you only heard me when the money stopped flowing. And that right there was the moment I realized we weren't having an argument about credit cards or family dinners or even embarrassment. We were having an argument about whether I mattered as a person or just as a provider. The answer was becoming clearer by the minute. You know what's better than having one person in your house who thinks you're being unreasonable? Having two people who think you're being unreasonable, especially when one of them has never paid a bill in his life, but somehow feels qualified to give financial aid on things that don't matter, while blowing my cash on things that don't matter either. When I heard a car door slam in our driveway with the kind of force that suggested someone was either really excited or really pissed off. Through the window, I watched Isaac climb out of his flashy red Mustang, the one he probably financed at about 20% interest because fiscal responsibility runs in Prius's family like sobriety runs in a distillery. He was wearing one of those expensive tracksuits that costs more than most people's rent, the kind that screams, "I have money but no class." And he was walking up to my front door like he owned the place, which, let's be clear, he absolutely did not. The doorbell rang exactly once before he started pounding on the door like the cops were chasing him, subtle as a brick through a window. That's Isaac. I took my sweet time getting up because if there's one thing I've learned in 12 years of dealing with Priya's family, it's that they mistake urgency for importance about 90% of the time. "Marcus!" he bellowed through the door because apparently doorbells are just suggestions in his world. "Open up, man! We need to talk!" I opened the door to find Isaac standing there with his chest puffed out like a rooster who'd just discovered he was the only male in the hen house. He was sweating already, and it wasn't even 10 in the morning yet. Either he jogged here, which, knowing Isaac's relationship with exercise, was about as likely as me winning the lottery twice in one day, or he was worked up about something. "Isaac," I said, leaning against the doorframe like I had all the time in the world. What a pleasant surprise. "To what do I owe the honor of this unannounced visit?" He pushed past me into my own house without being invited, because boundaries are apparently just abstract concepts to Priya's family. "Cut the crap, Marcus. Priya called me last night crying. Said you're acting crazy, freezing her out of your accounts and embarrassing her in public." Crying, huh? I closed the door and followed him into the living room where he'd already made himself comfortable on my couch. "That's interesting. Did she mention why I might have made some changes to our financial arrangements?" "Look, I don't know what kind of midlife crisis you're having." "Midlife crisis?" I interrupted, because that was rich coming from a guy who bought a sports car. He couldn't afford to impress women who wouldn't give him the time of day. "Is that what we're calling self-respect now?" He waved his hand dismissively like he was swatting away an annoying fly. "Come on, Marcus. Why are you making a scene over a card? You're the man. Pay the bill and move on. That's how this works." And there it was. The philosophy that had been slowly poisoning my marriage for 12 years, delivered with all the confidence of someone who'd never actually had to live by it. "That's how this works," he said, like there was some universal handbook that dictated I should shut up, pay up, and be grateful for the privilege. I looked him dead in the eyes, really studied his face for a moment. Isaac had always been the golden child in their family, the one who could do no wrong, even when he was doing everything wrong. He borrowed money from everyone and paid back no one, but somehow he was still invited to every family gathering. Hell, he was probably the guest of honor at most of them. "Let me ask you something, Isaac," I said, settling into my chair across from him. "When's the last time you paid for anything for anyone else without expecting something in return?" "What's that got to do with anything?" "Humor me." He shifted uncomfortably, which told me everything I needed to know. "I help out when I can." "That's not what I asked. I asked when you last paid for something, like opened your wallet, pulled out your own money or your own credit card, and bought something for someone else." "I bought Fiona a wedding gift." "With whose money?" The silence that followed was so thick you could have carved it up and served it for dinner. Isaac's face was turning an interesting shade of red that clashed beautifully with his designer tracksuit. "This isn't about me," he finally said, because deflection was clearly a family trait. "Isn't it, though? Because here you are in my house telling me how I should spend my money on your sister when you've never spent your money on anyone. You take things too personal. That's what you said, right?" "Yes." So I leaned forward because this was the moment I'd been building up to. "You take too much for granted." I reached into my wallet and pulled out the new credit card, the one with only my name on it, and held it up like it was a winning lottery ticket. "This house, these bills, all this stuff you people seem to think just magically appears. You ride on what I provide and I'm done." His eyes widened as the reality hit him. For the first time in probably his entire adult life, Isaac was looking at a situation where his usual charm and family connections weren't going to get him what he wanted. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. See, I figured something out recently. I've been so busy trying to be the good guy, the provider, the one who keeps everyone happy that I forgot to ask myself a pretty important question. What do I get out of this arrangement?" "You get a family." "Do I?" "Because last week, when your family had a dinner to celebrate your other sister's engagement, I wasn't invited. but my credit card was. Funny how that works, isn't it? Isaac stood up, probably thinking his physical presence would intimidate me into backing down. Poor guy had no idea that I was way past the point of being intimidated by anyone, especially someone who'd spent his entire adult life mooching off other people. You're being ridiculous, Marcus. It's just money. Just money. I laughed, and it wasn't a nice laugh. Easy to say when it's not your money. But here's the thing, Isaac. It's never just money when it's coming out of your own pocket, is it? He opened his mouth to argue, but I wasn't done yet. From now on, if you want something from this family, you can earn it the same way I did, with respect, with contribution, and with your own damn money. The look on his face was absolutely priceless, like someone had just explained quantum physics to him using interpretive dance. You know what they say about the best laid plans? Well, mine weren't just laid. They were architected, engineered, and executed with the precision of a Swiss watch. Because when you've been pushed around for 12 years, you don't just push back randomly. You push back strategically. That weekend, while Priya was at her Saturday morning Pilates class, the one that costs more per session than most people spend on groceries in a week, I was busy becoming the CEO of my own damn life. I'd taken Friday off work, told my boss I had some personal business to handle, which was technically true if you considered taking control of your finances. Personal business. First stop, the bank. Not just any bank visit, mind you, but the kind where you walk in with a folder full of documents and walk out with a completely restructured financial life. I'd done my homework, printed out 12 months of statements, and highlighted every single transaction that made my blood pressure spike. Mister, when the banker said, looking at my paperwork like I just handed him evidence of alien life, you want to remove your wife from all joint accounts and create a completely separate banking relationship. That's exactly what I want, I told him, settling back in that uncomfortable chair they probably designed to make people hurry through their financial decisions. I want my paycheck going into an account that only I can access, and I want all the existing cards canceled and reissued. The guy looked like he was trying to solve a math problem that didn't have a clear answer. Sir, this is pretty unusual. Most couples are trying to combine their finances, not separate them. Most couples probably don't have one person spending money like they're trying to single-handedly stimulate the economy, while the other person pays for everything and gets treated like furniture. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he just started typing. Smart man. While he was setting up my new financial independence, I explained my new philosophy. From now on, I pay for the house, utilities, and groceries. Everything else is optional. And optional requires permission. Permission from your wife. Permission from me. I'm the one earning it. I'm the one who gets to decide how it's spent. Next stop, online banking. I spent 2 hours changing every password, removing every shared access, and setting up a completely separate checking account that would become my new operational headquarters. It felt like decluttering, except instead of getting rid of old clothes, I was getting rid of financial parasites. The beautiful thing about technology is that you can change your entire life from your laptop while sitting in your pajamas. I transferred exactly what I needed for household expenses into our joint account, enough to cover the mortgage, utilities, and a reasonable grocery budget, and moved everything else into my new personal fortress of financial solitude. Then came the fun part, the new rules. I actually wrote them down because sometimes you need to see your boundaries in black and white to make sure they're real. Rule number 1. If you don't respect me, you don't spend from me. Simple, elegant, and impossible to misinterpret. Rule number 2. No purchase over $50 without explicit approval. And by approval, I'm in a conversation where someone explained why they needed something instead of just wanting it. Rule number 3. Emergencies are things like medical bills and car repairs, not sudden urges to redecorate the guest bathroom or buy organic smoothie ingredients that cost more than a nice dinner. Rule number 4. Family events that don't include me don't get funded by me. Revolutionary concept, I know. I was feeling pretty pleased with myself when I heard Priya's car pull into the driveway. She came through the front door looking all zen and peaceful from her yoga session, probably expecting to find me in my usual weekend mode of quietly handling whatever needed handling while she decided what she wanted to do with her day. "Hey, babe," she said, dropping her yoga mat by the door and heading toward the kitchen. "I'm thinking we should check out that new brunch place downtown. Sarah said their bottomless mimosas are amazing." "Sounds expensive," I said from the couch, not looking up from my laptop where I was admiring my newly organized financial dashboard. "It's just brunch, Marcus. We can afford it. We can afford it, or I can afford it." She stopped mid-stride, and I could practically hear the mental gears grinding as she tried to figure out what was different about this conversation. What's that supposed to mean? It means I spent my morning setting up some new financial arrangements. You know, taking control of my own money like a grown-up. What kind of arrangements? I closed the laptop and looked at her. Really looked at her, taking in that expression of dawning concern that was slowly replacing her post-yoga glow. The kind where I decide how my paycheck gets spent instead of just handing it over and hoping for the best. "Marcus, what did you do?" "I created a separate account for my income. Don't worry, there's still money in our joint account for household stuff. But the days of unlimited spending sprees are officially over." The silence that followed was like watching a computer try to process information that didn't compute. She stood there for a full 30 seconds, probably trying to figure out if I was joking or having some kind of breakdown. "So, what now?" she finally asked. "You're punishing me like a child." And there it was. The victim card played right on schedule. "No," I replied, getting up and walking toward the kitchen because I was suddenly craving another cup of that expensive coffee I'd bought myself. I'm finally respecting myself like a man. That's not fair. "You're right," I said, starting the coffee maker with the satisfaction of someone who no longer had to justify buying good coffee beans. It's not fair that I've been funding a lifestyle for someone who treats me like an inconvenience. It's not fair that I work 40+ hours a week just to watch my money disappear on things I never agreed to buy. And it's definitely not fair that I had to find out about my sister-in-law's engagement dinner by not being invited to it. This is insane. No, Priya. Insane was thinking that if I just kept being nice and accommodating and financially generous, eventually I'd earn enough respect to be treated like an actual family member instead of a walking credit card. I poured myself that coffee, added just the right amount of cream, and took a sip that tasted like freedom mixed with premium Colombian beans. From now on, if you want something that isn't a basic necessity, we're going to have a conversation about it. A real conversation where you explain why it's important, and I decide if it's worth my money. Her face went through about 15 different emotions in the span of 10 seconds. You can't be serious. Dead serious. Welcome to the new normal, where respect is a prerequisite for spending privileges. You ever notice how family drama spreads faster than gossip at a high school reunion? Because apparently, word of my financial rebellion had made its way through Priya's family tree quicker than a wildfire in a drought. Which brings me to Tuesday morning, when my phone rang at exactly 8:47 a.m., with a call that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so predictable. Marcus. The voice on the other end belonged to Leona, Priya's mother, and she said my name like it tasted bad in her mouth. "We need to discuss your recent behavior." I was sitting at my kitchen table eating breakfast that I'd bought with my own money from my own separate account. And let me tell you, that cereal tasted like victory with a hint of honey nut. "Good morning to you too, Leona. How lovely to hear from you on this beautiful Tuesday. Don't be smart with me, young man. Young man." I was 34 years old on my own house and had been married to her daughter for over a decade. But sure, let's go with young man because that definitely set the right tone for a productive conversation. "What can I do for you?" I asked, taking another spoonful of my Freedom cereal. "You know exactly why I'm calling. You're making things difficult for everyone, and it needs to stop." Define because. From where I'm sitting, I'm making things easier. Easier for me to keep track of my own money. Easier for me to maintain my own financial boundaries. Easier for me, too. "Fiona's wedding caterer needs a deposit," she interrupted, because apparently we were skipping right past the pleasantries and diving straight into the deep end of entitlement. And Priya said, "You're refusing to help." I set down my spoon and leaned back in my chair because this conversation was about to get interesting. Help with what, exactly? "The catering deposit, $5,000. The wedding is in 3 months, and if they don't get the money by Friday, they'll lose their slot. $5,000 for one day for people who had somehow managed to plan an entire wedding without once considering whether I wanted to be involved in paying for it. The irony was so thick, you could have served it as the main course. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, "because sometimes you have to spell things out for people who live in alternate realities." Fiona and her fiancé planned a wedding, hired a caterer, and made financial commitments without consulting the person they expected to pay for it. Your family, Marcus. Family helps family. There it was again, that magic word that apparently meant I was obligated to fund other people's dreams while being excluded from celebrating them. That's interesting, Leona, because when it came time for Fiona's engagement dinner, I wasn't family enough to get an invitation. But now that there's a bill to pay, suddenly, I'm family again. That was just a small, intimate gathering. Small and intimate, but not small enough to exclude the guy you're now calling for $5,000. The silence on the other end was beautiful. You could practically hear the mental gymnastics happening as she tried to figure out how to make this my problem instead of their problem. "Marcus, you're being unreasonable." Am I? Because let me walk you through what reasonable looks like from my perspective. Reasonable would have been getting invited to celebrate my sister-in-law's engagement. Reasonable would have been being consulted before financial commitments were made on my behalf. Reasonable would have been being treated like a family member instead of a family ATM. You're tearing the family apart. And there it was, the guilt trip delivered right on schedule. Because somehow, me wanting basic respect and inclusion was tearing the family apart. But excluding me from family events while expecting me to pay for them was just good old-fashioned family values. "Leona," I said, and I kept my voice as calm and steady as a lake on a windless day. "Let me ask you something. When was the last time this family did something nice for me without expecting money in return?" "We invited you to Christmas dinner." "The Christmas dinner I paid for. The one where I bought the ham, the wine, and the dessert, then spent the evening listening to everyone complain about their financial problems while sitting at a table I'd essentially catered myself." Another beautiful silence. These people really weren't used to having their logic questioned, were they? "I'm not tearing the family apart," I continued. "I'm just finally refusing to be the family credit card. There's a difference." "So, what are we supposed to tell Fiona?" Tell her the truth. Tell her that weddings cost money, and if you want to have an expensive wedding, you need to figure out how to pay for it. Novel concept, I know. You can't be serious. Dead serious. See, here's what's going to happen from now on. If this family wants to plan events, make financial commitments, or spend money on celebrations, that's fantastic. But those plans need to be made by the people who are paying for them. And if you want me to contribute, then I need to be included in the planning process, not just the payment process. That's not how family works. You're right, I said, finishing my coffee and feeling more satisfied than I had in years. That's not how your family works. Your family works by finding someone with money and bleeding them dry while treating them like an outsider. But that's not how healthy families work. And it's definitely not how my family is going to work anymore. I can't believe you're doing this to us. I'm not doing anything to you, I'm doing something for me. For the first time in 12 years, I'm prioritizing my own financial security and emotional well-being over your family's convenience. The phone went quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. Then, maybe the family should have invited me to dinner before counting on my money, I said, and hung up the phone. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. You know that moment and you're left sitting across from each other with nothing but the cold, hard truth? Yeah. Well, welcome to my Thursday night. Priya had been tiptoeing around me for 3 days since her mother's phone call, probably trying to figure out if I was having some kind of temporary insanity, or if this was the new permanent me. She'd make these little comments here and there, testing the waters like a kid poking a sleeping bear with a stick, but I wasn't taking the bait. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. "Can we talk?" she said, as I was finishing up the dinner I'd cooked for myself. Nothing fancy, just some pasta and chicken that I'd bought with my own money from my own account. Simple pleasures hit different when you're not wondering how much your wife spent on lunch while you were eating a sandwich at your desk. "We can talk," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me at our dining table. The same table where we used to have normal conversations about normal things, back when I thought being financially used was just part of being a good husband. She sat down slowly like she was approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she was wearing that expression people get when they're about to have a conversation they really don't want to have. "I've been thinking," she started, which was usually code for, "I've been plotting how to get my way without actually admitting I was wrong." "That's dangerous," I said, taking a sip of the wine I'd opened. A bottle I bought specifically because I wanted it, not because we needed it for some family gathering I wouldn't be invited to. "I'm serious, Marcus." "So am I. Continue." She took a deep breath like she was about to jump off a cliff. "I know you're upset about the engagement dinner." "Stop right there," I said, holding up my hand like a traffic cop. "This isn't about me being upset. This is about me finally recognizing a pattern that's been going on for years." "What pattern?" I leaned back in my chair and really looked at her. Not the quick glances you give someone when you're rushing around getting ready for work, but the kind of long, serious look you give when you're trying to figure out if you actually know the person sitting across from you. The pattern where I'm invisible until you need something, where I'm not worth including, but I'm always worth billing, where my feelings don't matter but my wallet does. She shifted uncomfortably, probably because hearing the truth out loud is never as easy as avoiding it in your head. "That's not, I don't want the old Marcus back," I asked, cutting through whatever excuse she was about to manufacture. "The one who paid and stayed silent. That man is gone." The silence that followed was the kind that makes you hear things you don't usually notice. The hum of the refrigerator, the neighbor's dog barking, the sound of a marriage hanging by a thread. "I didn't mean to leave you out," she finally whispered, and I had to give her credit for at least trying to sound sincere. "You didn't forget, Priya. You chose not to include me. There's a difference." I leaned forward because this was the part where we either started being honest or we started planning separate lives. "When you made that guest list, did my name ever cross your mind?" "It was Fiona's event, and she said she wanted it small. But you used my card to pay for the cake. Funny how my name crossed your mind when it came time to fund the party, but not when it came time to attend it." Her eyes were getting watery, which would have worked on the old Marcus, the one who hated seeing her cry more than he hated being disrespected. But the new Marcus had learned something important. Tears don't wash away patterns of behavior. "I'm sorry," she said, and it sounded like she actually meant it this time. But I didn't nod. I didn't say, "It's okay," or "We'll figure it out," or any of the other automatic responses that had gotten me into this mess in the first place. I just sat there and let her words hang in the air like smoke. "Are you sorry that you excluded me? Or are you sorry that I finally did something about it?" "Both," she admitted, which was probably the most honest thing she'd said in months. "At least you're being real now." I finished my wine and set the glass down with the kind of finality that makes a statement. But sorry doesn't fix 12 years of being taken for granted. "So, what do you want from me?" "I want to know if you see me as a person or as a resource. I want to know if you love me or if you love what I provide. And I want the truth, not whatever answer you think will get you back in my bank account." She was full-on crying now, and part of me, the part that had been trained to fix her problems and soothe her feelings, wanted to reach across the table and comfort her. But a bigger part of me, the part that was tired of being a supporting character in my own life, stayed right where I was. "I don't know," she sobbed, and that honesty hit harder than any lie could have. "Then that's our problem right there," I said, standing up from the table. "I need time to think about what I want. This marriage was built on trust, and I don't see any." I walked toward the door, leaving her sitting at that table with her tears and her thoughts and the uncomfortable reality that actions have consequences. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "For a drive to think about whether I want to be married to someone who doesn't know if they love me or just love my money." And with that mic drop moment, I grabbed my keys and headed out into the night, feeling lighter than I had in years. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Just when you think you've got all the pieces of your personal disaster figured out, someone shows up at your door with a whole new puzzle that makes you realize you weren't seeing the complete picture at all. I was sitting on my back porch the next morning, nursing my second cup of coffee and contemplating whether I should feel guilty about sleeping in the guest room for the first time in 12 years of marriage, when I heard a knock at my front door. Not the aggressive pounding that Isaac had blessed me with earlier in the week, but a hesitant, almost apologetic kind of knock that suggested whoever was on the other side actually had some manners. Through the peephole, I could see Terrence, Fiona's fiancé, standing on my doorstep, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, running his hand through his hair and generally exhibiting all the body language of someone who was about to have an uncomfortable conversation they didn't want to have. This ought to be interesting. I opened the door to find him looking even more uncomfortable up close. Terrence was a decent guy from what little I knew about him. Worked in it, seemed to genuinely love Fiona, and it never struck me as the entitled type that seemed to run in Pre's family like a genetic disorder. "Marcus," he said, and then stopped like he'd forgotten the rest of his prepared speech. Can we talk? Sure, I said, stepping aside to let him in. Coffee? God, yes, please. I poured him a mug of the good stuff, and we settled into my living room, where he proceeded to stare into his coffee like it might contain the answers to life's greatest mysteries. The silence stretched out until it got uncomfortable, and I was starting to wonder if he'd come here just to drink my coffee and contemplate his existence. Look, he finally said. I had no idea you weren't invited to the engagement dinner. If I did, I'd have said something. I raised an eyebrow. You didn't know? Fiona told me it was just immediate family. Parents, siblings, that's it. I didn't realize you weren't considered. He trailed off, probably realizing he was about to step in something messy. Immediate family. I finished for him. Yeah, that was news to me, too. He went like someone had just told him his favorite restaurant had been shut down by the health department. That's messed up, man. You've been married to Priya longer than I've even known Fiona. 12 years, I confirmed. But apparently that doesn't buy you a seat at the table when it comes to celebrating family milestones. Terence reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope that looked like it had been through a war. That's actually why I'm here. I think you need to see this. He handed me the envelope with the kind of careful movement people use when they're handling explosives. Inside were receipts, lots of them. Credit card statements, store receipts, online purchase confirmations, all organized with the precision of someone who worked with data for a living. What am I looking at? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Priya's spending over the last 6 months, at least the stuff I could track down. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, looking like a man who was about to deliver some very bad news. Marcus, I think she's spiraling, man. I started flipping through the receipts, and let me tell you, it was like watching a horror movie where you know something terrible is about to happen, but you can't look away. Designer handbags, spa treatments, restaurant bills that cost more than some people's car payments, shopping sprees that would make a millionaire's wife blush. How did you get all this? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Fiona's been worried about her sister for months. Said, Priya has been acting weird, always talking about money, always suggesting expensive things they should do together. So Fiona started paying attention, and he gestured at the envelope. One receipt caught my eye. $1,000 spa day from 2 weeks ago. The same day, I'd been working late trying to finish a project that would hopefully lead to a promotion. While I was stress-eating a gas station sandwich at my desk, my wife was getting a hot stone massage that cost more than most people's rent. There's more, Terence said quietly. More. None of this was run by Fiona either. Priya would suggest these expensive outings. Then just show up and put everything on your card. Fiona felt guilty about it, but she didn't know how to say no without causing drama. I found another receipt. A shopping trip where Priya had bought Fiona 3 dresses for various wedding-related events. $450 for outfits Fiona had never asked for and apparently felt uncomfortable accepting. She's been using your money to play the generous sister, Terence continued, making herself look good by being lavishly generous with funds that weren't hers to be generous with. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they were forming was uglier than I'd imagined. It wasn't just that Priya had been spending my money without asking. She'd been using it to buy social status, to position herself as the fun, generous sister who could afford to treat everyone to nice things. That's not even the worst part, Terence said, and I looked up from the receipts because honestly I wasn't sure how much worse this could get. There's a worst part, the engagement party planning. Fiona wanted something simple, dinner at a nice restaurant, maybe 30 people max, but Priya kept pushing for bigger, more expensive options, insisted they needed live music, specialty cocktails, custom decorations. Turned a simple dinner into a production that cost 3 times what Fiona wanted to spend. And she planned to pay for all this. How? With your card. Apparently, Fiona didn't find out until after everything was ordered that Priya had never actually cleared any of these expenses with you. That's why they ended up having this small family dinner instead. Because Fiona got scared about the cost and scaled everything back at the last minute. I set the receipts down and leaned back in my chair trying to process what I was hearing. So, let me get this straight. Priya volunteered my money for an expensive party, planned elaborate celebrations I was never consulted about, and when her sister got cold feet about the cost, they just didn't invite me. Fiona was embarrassed. She thought you'd be angry about how much money Priya had committed without asking you. So she figured it would be easier to just keep it small and not invite anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions about the budget. Anyone like the guy who was paying for it? Yeah. Terrence looked miserable. I told Fiona she should have talked to you directly, but she was scared of causing problems between you and Priya. The irony was so thick you could have served it with a spoon. Fiona was trying to protect my marriage by excluding me from family events, while Priya was destroying it by volunteering my money for things I'd never agreed to pay for. How long has this been going on? I asked. Based on what I could track, at least 2 years, probably longer. 2 years. 730 days of my wife using my earnings to buy herself a reputation as the generous, fun sister, while I sat at home wondering why I felt so disconnected from her family. Marcus, Terrence said, his voice quiet and serious. I don't think this is just about money anymore. I think Priya's got some kind of problem. Like she needs the validation of being seen as the person who can afford nice things even when she can't actually afford them. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about me being excluded or taken for granted. This was about my wife having some kind of psychological need to appear wealthy and generous, and she was using my income to feed that need without any regard for how it affected our relationship or our financial security. The wedding caterer deposit your mother-in-law called about. Terrence continued. Fiona never asked for help with that. Priya volunteered you for it without checking with either of you first. I sat there in my living room surrounded by evidence of financial betrayal that went deeper than I had imagined, and realized that I wasn't just married to someone who took me for granted. I was married to someone who had been systematically using my earnings to construct a false image of herself. And I'd been so busy trying to be a good husband that I'd never noticed I was being used as a prop in someone else's performance. The wake-up call wasn't just about setting boundaries anymore. It was about figuring out whether my marriage was worth saving, or if I was just enabling someone who saw me as nothing more than a means to fund her delusions of grandeur. You know what's worse than being lied to? Being lied to for so long that when the truth finally comes out, you realize you've been living in someone else's fantasy novel where you're the unwitting sugar daddy financing the whole production. And the really fun part? When that person finally admits the truth. They expect you to just forgive and forget, like it's all been some silly misunderstanding. Friday evening rolled around like a slow-motion car crash, and I was sitting in my kitchen staring at Taryn's envelope of receipts for what felt like the 100th time when I heard the front door open. Not the confident stride of someone coming home to their castle, but the hesitant, almost apologetic footsteps of someone who knew they were walking into hostile territory. Priya appeared in the doorway with a small suitcase in her hand, looking like she was either heading out for a weekend getaway or preparing to move out permanently. Her eyes were red and puffy, suggesting she'd been doing some serious crying. and her usually perfect hair looked like she'd been running her hands through it for hours. "I'm going to stay at Fiona's for a few days," she said, setting the suitcase down by the door like she was testing the waters to see how I'd react. I looked up from the receipts spread across my kitchen table, evidence of 2 years of financial betrayal that I'd been too trusting to notice. Running away isn't going to solve this. Priya, I'm not running away. I just think maybe some space will help us both think clearly. Think clearly about what? About how you've been using my money to play the role of the generous sister while excluding me from the family I was funding? Because I'm thinking pretty clearly about that already. She winced like I'd slapped her, which would have made me feel guilty a week ago. But that was before I discovered that my wife had been essentially embezzling from our marriage to buy herself social status with people who didn't even respect me enough to invite me to dinner. "Maybe some space will help," she muttered again, like repeating it would make it true. I said nothing. Not okay. Not, I understand. Not, call me when you're ready to talk. Just nothing. Because sometimes silence is the most honest response you can give. She waited for a reaction, probably expecting me to beg her to stay or at least to argue with her about leaving. When neither happened, she looked even more uncomfortable than when she'd walked in. "I'll call you," she said, picking up her suitcase. "Sure you will." And off she went, leaving me alone in the house I paid for, surrounded by evidence of betrayal that went deeper than I'd ever imagined. The silence after she left was different from the usual quiet of an empty house. It was the silence of someone finally being honest about what their life had become. 2 days. That's how long it took before my phone rang with her number on the caller ID. 2 days of me living in peace, eating what I wanted, watching what I wanted, and not having to wonder what surprise expenses would show up on my credit card statement. "Marcus," she said when I answered, and her voice sounded like she'd been crying again. I told them everything. Fiona, Mom, Isaac. I was wrong. I messed up. Told them what exactly? About the money? About the spending? About how I've been using you, using me? At least she was finally calling it what it was instead of dancing around it with euphemisms about family helping family and it's just money. "I treated you like a credit card, not a husband," she continued, and I could hear her voice breaking. "But I remember who you are now, and I miss you." There it was. The apology I'd been waiting 12 years to hear. The acknowledgement that I was a person with feelings instead of just a financial resource with legs. It should have felt like a victory, but instead it felt like too little, too late. "Do you miss me or the money?" I asked because after seeing Taryn's receipts, I wasn't sure she knew the difference anymore. The silence that followed was so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Both," she said. And that single word hit me harder than if she'd screamed at me for an hour. I miss both, and I hate myself for that. Both. She missed me and my money, and she was honest enough to admit it in some twisted way. That honesty was more painful than all the lies had been because it confirmed what I'd suspected but hoped wasn't true. That somewhere along the way, I'd become inseparable from my bank account in her mind. "That's the problem," I replied, and it felt like I was pronouncing the death sentence on something that had been dying for years. Anyway, she broke into sobs, then the kind of ugly, desperate crying that happens when someone finally realizes they've destroyed something they can't fix because it wasn't okay, and I wasn't sure there was anything left to figure out. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she managed between sobs. I know I've been horrible, but Marcus, please. I can't lose you. I can't lose us. You already did lose us, I said, and my voice was calmer than I expected. You lost us the first time you chose to exclude me from something while including my money. You lost us every time you made a financial decision without consulting me. You lost us when you decided that my feelings mattered less than your image. I can change. I can be better. Can you? Because this isn't just about bad spending habits, Priya. This is about you fundamentally not seeing me as a partner. This is about you using my earnings to buy yourself a social position while treating me like hired help who should be grateful for the privilege of funding your lifestyle. The crying got louder, more desperate, and I found myself feeling oddly detached from it all. Like I was watching someone else's marriage fall apart instead of experiencing the destruction of my own. What do you want from me? She finally asked. Tell me what to do to fix this. I want you to understand that some things can't be fixed with apologies. I want you to realize that trust once broken, this completely doesn't just magically repair itself because you're sorry. And I want you to accept that maybe, just maybe, you've damaged this relationship beyond the point where fixing it is even possible. You're giving up on us. I'm not giving up on us, Priya. I'm accepting reality. And the reality is that you've spent 2 years systematically deceiving me about money while excluding me from the family life I was financing. That's not a marriage. That's a business arrangement where only one person knew what the terms were. The phone went quiet except for her sniffling, and I could picture her sitting in Fiona's guest room, probably surrounded by tissues and regret, finally understanding that some mistakes are too big to be undone with tears and promises. I love you, she whispered, like those 3 words were a magic spell that could undo 2 years of financial betrayal and emotional neglect. Do you? Or do you love the idea of me? Because the man you actually love, the one whose feelings matter, whose opinions count, whose presence is valued, that man never existed in your version of our marriage. And with that truth hanging in the air between us like smoke from a fire that had already burned everything down, I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my empty house, finally understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to pretend that love is enough to fix everything. I didn't take her back right away, and let me tell you, that was the smartest decision I'd made in 12 years of marriage. Because here's the thing about rock bottom. Sometimes you have to let people hit it before they realize they need to start climbing. She asked for a second chance like it was something I owed her, like forgiveness was just another bill I was supposed to pay without question. But I learned something important during those weeks of sleeping in my own guest room. Wanting something and deserving something are 2 completely different animals. I need proof, not promises. I told her during one of our awkward coffee shop meetings, neutral territory where she couldn't use tears and familiarity to manipulate the conversation. I need to see actual change, not just hear about it. And you know what? She actually did it. Closed all her personal credit cards, every single one. Got herself a part-time job at a boutique downtown, something she'd never had to do before because my income had always been enough to fund her lifestyle. Started budgeting like a grown-up instead of spending like a teenager with daddy's credit card. The change was slow, like watching paint dry or waiting for a broken bone to heal. But it was real. She stopped asking for money and started contributing. Stopped suggesting expensive outings and started proposing walks in the park. Stopped treating me like a human ATM and started treating me like a human being. I didn't punish her. That would have been petty and counterproductive. But I didn't protect her from consequences either. When she couldn't afford something, I didn't swoop in to save the day. When her friends suggested expensive brunches, she had to decline or pay her own way. When her family made financial assumptions about what we could afford, she had to correct them. And slowly, our marriage started looking like an actual partnership, instead of a financial hostage situation. The day Fiona got married, I was at the table with a seat that had my name on it. Not because I paid for anything, but because I was finally respected enough to be included. The irony wasn't lost on me. The first family event I actually enjoyed was the one I didn't fund. Boundaries, it turns out, aren't walls to keep people out. They're foundations that healthy relationships are built on. And that foundation was priceless.